Okay, now we will open the City Council meeting. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Shanaway?
Present.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing?
Here. First is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which is September 4th, 2007.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Stevenson, seconded by Mr. Lewis. Any additions or corrections? Mr. Bowersox.
I just had one. It's actually the minutes of the 17th, even though on our agenda it was shown as the 4th. But the minutes themselves and everything in the minutes was right, listed as the 17th. So I just want to straighten those two out.
Any other corrections? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Any additions to the agenda? I would like to move the appointments for the fire department up to right after petitions and communications, if there's no objection, because we have a few people here who are interested in that. Okay, let us start with petitions and communications. Anybody who would like to address the Urbana City Council could fill out a little card like this. I do have some people who have already filled them out. Let's start with Cynthia Hoyle.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Hoyle, and I'm here to talk to you about Walk to School Day. And you have a proclamation, I believe, for us tonight. And I have a presentation that they said that we could give. There we go.
Cynthia, could you hold the microphone closer, especially so Charlie can hear what you're saying?
Can you hear me, Charlie?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of the conversation is cutting out on me, though.
Okay. We just wanted to give you a very brief presentation about our event. We're excited this year. We have every school in Urbana elementary school participating, and altogether we had over 45. We're going to have over 4,500 kids participating in Walk and Bike to School Day this year. And as a little bit of background, we just wanted to run through some information for you that in 1969, 48% of the students walked or biked to school, and in 2001, less than 15% of the students walked and biked to school. And it says that even 34% of students living within a mile of school walk or bike, compared to 90% in 1969. So this is also a graph showing you graphically how that works, and you can see biking is particularly low, and that has proven to be the case here as well. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that the reasons why schools are participating in these events now. The number one reason is health, that the CDC has declared that there's really an epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes in children, and they have concluded that the built environment is a major part of this. In fact, the College of Pediatricians has recommended now that pediatricians ask children what kind of neighborhood they live in as a health question, because children who live in neighborhoods where they can walk or bike or have access to parks get more exercise than other children. Also, the pedestrian injuries are the fourth leading cause of unintentional injury-related death among children, and so we want to make sure that they can get back and forth to school. That's not children just walking to school, that's altogether the number of children. Then there is the issue of congestion around schools in the morning, and those of you who we are thrilled to have joining us this year will get to observe that firsthand. And most of the time, the traffic around the schools is also other parents. So then the parents feel their children are not safe because there's too much traffic, and so more of them drive, and so, you know, it just is a self-perpetuating problem. The reasons for the decline that they have identified is the ones that you would anticipate. It's a poor walking environment, the densities are too low, there's not enough of a mix of land use, the blocks are too long, the sidewalks are incomplete, there aren't good crosswalks or poorly maintained crosswalks. Here in Urbana, we are, I think, lucky to have a public works department that has been working on this, and I think that we mostly have complete sidewalks going to our schools and a lot of newly painted crosswalks. But we always have room for improvement, and we're working on that. And as you know, Urbana put in a large grant application to the Safe Routes to School for funding to take care of some of those deficiencies. We have 2 programs that are helping address this problem, Safe Routes to School and Walk and Bike to School Day. Those are both operating in our community, and they overlap. Walk and Bike to School Day is really a component of Safe Routes to School. So what we're trying to do is promote pedestrian and bicycle behavior that is safe in and around our schools, and healthy lifestyles, and deal with the congestion around our schools and improve the air quality, because all of those vehicles also significantly impact the air quality around schools. So here we have our participating local officials. We're delighted to have the number of elected officials joining us, both the mayors of Champaign and Urbana. Councilmember Bowersox is going to be joining us. We have a representative from Senator Frerich's office. Actually, he can't come because of the veto session. And a county board member and a number of athletes, including the cycling team at the university. So we're delighted to have all of these people participating. And I want to say the city of Urbana is wonderfully supportive. Public Works and the police department both dedicate staff to assisting us in organizing these events, and we're delighted to have them. So that's all I have. I just wanted you to know that we appreciate your support, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Brandon Bowersox.
Yeah, Cynthia, could you describe a little, I think everybody who's a parent of an elementary school student in Urbana should get a survey that goes home
Yes.
some days, at maybe Monday or Tuesday this week, and
A
tell
lot
us
of them
about
went out last week, in fact. We have printed out for every student at every participating school a walkability checklist. And we have printed the Safe Routes to School map on the back of that, and the parents who are walking with their children can help us by identifying any obstacles and marking on the map where they are, so that Public Works can actually find the problem, because sometimes we've gotten problems listed and Public Works went out and looked and they couldn't find where it was. So if we could get more information from parents, that would be helpful. All of the kids also are getting a little backpack reflector, Safe Kids reflector this year. They get a safety sheet with tips on pedestrian and bicycling behavior. And this year, Durcycle has donated 2 bicycles to give it away in a drawing. We'll do one in Urbana and one in Champaign. And on each checklist, there's a spot for the student's first name, their teacher's name, and their school. And if they fill that out and turn it in, we will be doing a drawing, and somebody will get a nice, shiny new bicycle. So we're really delighted to have the support of Durcycle for this event.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I do have a proclamation from the mayors of the cities of Champaign and Urbana. Whereas many children could be spared injury, disability, and death each year by communities making pedestrian and bicycle safety a priority, and whereas physical inactivity is identified as contributing to obesity, diabetes, and health problems among children, and walking and biking to school are positive ways to increase activity and improve health, and whereas driving students to school contributes to traffic congestion and air pollution, and whereas an important role for parents and caregivers is to teach children correct pedestrian and bicycle safety, awareness of pathway hazards en route to school, and risks related to physical inactivity and air pollution. And for this reason, Gerald Schweihart, Mayor of the City of Champaign, Illinois, and Laurel Lunt Pressing, Mayor of the City of Urbana, Illinois, do hereby proclaim October 3rd, 2007 as International Walk to School Day, and encourage everyone to consider the safety and health of children today and every day. And I'd like to give you this proclamation. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you do on this.
There are also flyers on the back table. If anybody wants more information, you can pick one up in the back. Thank you.
Okay. All All right, next, Tyler Fitch. Okay. Christopher Storr. You want to speak now? Or wait?
I think I'll just wait till the NCD comes.
Okay. Betsy Cronin supports the Neighborhood Conservation District but will not speak. Next, Durrell Cruz. Please state your name and address and keep your remarks to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. My name is Durrell Cruz. I live at 2007 South George Huck Drive, and I'm here tonight just to update the City Council and the residents of Urbana regarding the Urbana citizens for instant runoff voting. I think we came to the Urbana City Council about 4 months ago. Just like to let you know that we've finished our petition drive, and we turned in 81 pages to the city clerk. Last Friday, we collected over 1,062 signatures of residents of Urbana to place on the ballot on February 5th referendum asking them to consider changing the way we conduct elections in Urbana from plurality, single plurality, to instant runoff voting. We had over 15 people participate in collecting the petitions, and all segments, areas of Urbana were touched upon and shared the information. Generally, when talking to people, most people had never heard of instant runoff voting. I would say 90% of the people probably have never heard of that option. Surprisingly, though, once they do hear and learn of it, I would estimate between 60 and 65% of the residents of Urbana readily signed the petition and were eager to have that option available for them to vote on in February. Lastly, I would just like to say that the last time we talked to the City Council, I know questions were raised, was there any empirical evidence out there that showed that instant runoff voting might accomplish what it claims to do? And I've been looking high and low for something to kind of address that question. And I did find, fortunately, a paper that was done by Richard D. Leon. He's a PhD, Professor Emeritus from the Department of Political Science at San Francisco State University. And San Francisco is one of the first cities to institute instant runoff voting in the country. And what he did is he did an analysis of the San Francisco supervisor's race in 2004, doing exit poll analysis of the results of how the voters felt about the change to instant runoff voting as compared to the previous system that they had used. And just very briefly, I would like to just read his summary, and if anybody in the public or the City Council would like a copy of his study, I would be happy to email it to you. But very quickly, as the movement for instant runoff voting expands and gathers steam in California, Vermont, Michigan, and other states, it is important for both advocates and critics of this electoral reform to study whether IRV actually works in practice the way some have predicted it would, based mainly on theory. In this paper, I test some of the predictions of IRV theory against the results of IRV practice based upon an independent analysis of exit poll designed to assess voter experience with this new way of voting. Several key questions pose an acid test for pro-IRV claims. For example, compared to systems that require special runoff election when no candidate wins the majority, does IRV really make it more likely that voters will vote for candidates they most prefer rather than for candidates they don't much like, but who seem more electable? Under IRV, are voters less likely to feel they have wasted their votes? Does IRV, in fact, encourage election campaigns that are more civil and less negative in tone? Is ranked choice voting really as easy as 1, 2, 3, as many advocates have claimed, or too difficult to understand, as some critics have charged? Finally, based upon their actual experience with both systems, would voters prefer to continue using ranked choice ballots, such as IRV, or go back to using the more familiar method? Based on the careful study of San Francisco's recent experience with ranked choice ballots and IRV, these kinds of questions can now be measured with hard empirical evidence. The findings strongly and unequivocally support most of the claims made by proponents of IRV. In short, at least in this one city, IRB works very well indeed. It lives up to its advanced billing, and the city's voters prefer it overwhelmingly. And I'll just stop there. It goes through the series of questions that they asked at the exit polls, the responses that the voters had to those, and many of the questions that we have used to suggest that it's a positive change for Urbana. I think if you're interested in reading some of that empirical data, I'd be happy to share that report with you. And we certainly look forward to the opportunity of Urbana residents voting on that referendum come February 5th.
Brandon Bowersox.
Yeah, I just have one short question, Darrell. Thanks for the update. One of the questions I've heard from people that I've heard different things from different folks on, and I wonder if you have the answer here, is whether or not this would eliminate the primary and general elections and we would just have one election in the city elections if this passed.
No. What this does is simply institutes a different voting method in both the primary and the general election. It does not consolidate the primary and general elections together.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Robert Dunn.
I just want to be on record as opposed to neighborhood conservation.
Okay, Robert Dunn opposes neighborhood conservation districts. Bernadine Stake.
I just wanted to thank you all for working so hard on neighborhood conservation districts, and I'm very much in favor of it passing. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move to the, unless there's anyone else who would like to address the council, let's move to appointments. Mayoral appointments. Fire Chief, I'm recommending Michael Dilley. Motion by Ms. Stevenson, seconded by Ms. Chenoweth. Any discussion? Mr. Roberts.
Well, we did talk with Mr. Dilley upstairs. We have been given his training resume. It's an impressive one. We have faith in the, I have faith, I'll say that, in his working with the city, and it's always nice to see advancements from within the ranks. A person who's been with the city for a considerable number of years, rising through different stations of responsibility. I support the nomination.
I would echo Mr. Roberts' sentiments, and just pleased to have you on board.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Dilley. Chief Dilley, would you like to make a speech?
Could you speak so that the folks on television could hear? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very nice. I appreciate that very much. I'd like to acknowledge a group of Urbana's bravest. Sorry about that. These guys are some of the best firefighters that I know. And they're extremely supportive, and they're a great bunch of people, and I'm proud of every one of them. And we're going to do our dead level best to make the citizens of Urbana and all of you very proud of us. I'd like to acknowledge my son, Craig, right here. Mm-hmm. He's the one reason for this.
Oh my gosh.
We asked him earlier if he got hurt on the job, and he told me it was your fault. So.
And last but not least, my wife, Peggy, who is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we do have a couple of openings for division chief, and I think the division chiefs agreed that whoever got to be the fire chief would make that choice. And I'm going along with Chief Dilley's recommendation that the next new division chief is Russell Chisholm. Okay? And is there a motion on that? Okay. Lynn Barnes, is there a second?
I'd like to second that motion,
And
please.
Dennis Roberts. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's unanimous.
Okay.
Congratulations. Okay, we are very proud of you already, and I'm sure that you're going to reach new heights. I hope you don't fall off any ladders, but you're going to reach new heights. Okay, thank you all for coming. Okay, we'll get back to the regular order here. Under old business, ordinance number 2007-06-059, an ordinance approving a text amendment to the zoning ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois, adding section 13-5, neighborhood conservation districts, to the Urbana zoning ordinance. And this is plan case number 2023-T-06. And I understand from the clerk's office that there's already a motion on the table by Mr. Roberts, seconded by Mr. Smythe, to approve this. This is
From before.
This is from
has been
before, right.
held
So
over
do you
from-
two gentlemen wish to continue with that motion?
I will.
Mr. Smythe? Well,
Yes, I'd like to continue.
okay. All right, so there's a motion. Is there any
The
discussion?
motion has been amended by Danielle, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the
Yes.
question is.
The amendment has been added.
There's new
Okay.
text.
Okay, so to be clear, that what is being furthered on the table is the motion from June 18th with the amendment from the Committee of the Whole last week?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right,
That's my understanding.
Okay.
right.
And with that
For-
includes staff's changes. We had given prior direction to clear up a few things in wording, which were in markout and strikeout last week, and which are now included in the text. So I assume that's okay and included as well.
Yes.
Okay. Robert Myers is here to discuss this ordinance.
Well, I guess first and foremost, since there's a motion on the floor, do you have any questions or comments that I can help you with?
Dennis Roberts.
And also, we have public input on this. I wonder if we should go to that there first.
Okay. Some of the people asked to comment after the staff report, so,
So we're in the midst of a staff report.
well, if, maybe there isn't a staff report. Robert's here to answer any questions, so council members can ask questions. And then we'll open it up for the people who want to testify on this.
Okay. All right. So I had a few questions for you, Robert.
Sure.
Generally, I'm feeling very comfortable with this ordinance as it's written. I see a few weaknesses, and maybe you can clarify for me, I guess, the form that we're at the present moment. And in some ways, I feel like these questions have come to my mind after having talked about the neighborhood conservation districts extensively in earlier months, and then kind of having a hiatus in my attention span on them, as they seemed to languish for a while. Now they've returned to us, and I went through the ordinance again pretty carefully, and I have a few questions for you. One of the processes that does occur when during the preliminary determination is that on page 7 of the ordinance, and I'm referring to a copy, I'm referring to a copy that's perhaps not the most current copy. Well, okay, this is, my copy is dated September 26th, so is that a one that's appropriate? Okay. On page 7, number Okay, let me look. It has to do with the appearance of the ordinance to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay.
All right. Okay, yeah, it's number 3.
F3.
I was looking at 2 and I wasn't figuring that out, but it's actually 3. And so it says that indeed the Secretary shall forward the application to the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission for review. The Historic Preservation Commission may find that the proposed district appears to qualify for designation as a local historic district, in which case the applicants may choose to withdraw their application. I think there's a celebration going on outside. I hear a fire siren going on, so. I think there's a.
I think it's actual fire.
I think. All right. A man's getting a.
Water or beer being poured out.
It's a. There's a libation of water or something happening out there. Okay. So it says that the application is reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission, and then upon the advice of the HPC, applicants may choose to withdraw their application or apply for historic district designation, or continue with the conservation district application. And really the process, it indicates that there's a process there, but it's very vague about how that process is actually achieved. And in many other parts of the plan, people are given a certain number of days of expectation when something starts, when something is due, and for whatever, this is like a very open-ended one. So I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate to make it a little more specific what the neighborhood association or the group of citizens should be expecting from the HPC, and how they're notified of the result, and what kind of time frame are we talking about. It would seem to me that it would have to say that the Secretary shall forward the application to the Urbana Historic Preservation Commission for review, and I would add, at their next regularly scheduled meeting, so that we would know when they'd pick it up, because they might have an agenda that, they might postpone it for 3 months. We don't know what their agendas are like. And then there should be something that would indicate that the findings of the Historic Preservation Commission shall be sent to the applicants within, and I'm going to suggest 15 days of the date of their discussion, i.e. they need to have some kind of formal way of knowing what the HPC has determined. And unless they send representatives to the HPC meeting and are taking notes, it's unsure really what formalizes the opinions expressed during the HPC conversation. So that's just a part that I found was a little loose. My other question is perhaps broader, and it is that the Neighborhood Conservation District is intended to address some pretty particular issues that have come up in various neighborhoods. If one of the concerns of a neighborhood is a desire to have a reevaluation or a suggestion of different zoning along certain, in certain blocks or in the entire designated district that's being established, how is that conversation and that desire able to be communicated in the NCD? Because the word zoning doesn't appear in it, to my knowledge, in any location. So is it not intended to address zoning issues? Robert?
Well, there's, let me start on the first question. With the Historic Preservation Commission reviewing the application, you probably recall that in the initial process, the process was the application would go to the Historic Preservation Commission first, and based on their determination, it may or may not be able to proceed forward, and they could actually, depending on their determination, forward or prevent from moving forward an application. And people felt like that was too limiting, in that why necessarily should neighborhood conservation districts be defined by the historic preservation context? So people asked that it be taken out. So we changed the process. So now it, just like other zoning reviews, it goes to the Planning Commission and then and Plan Commission makes a recommendation and to the City Council, and the City Council adopts it. But at the same time, we offer the Historic Preservation Commission an opportunity to comment on. So it's not, that process is sort of an advisory review that's happens at the same time, really, as the Plan Commission review, but it's not really the binding process on an it doesn't necessarily bind the application from moving forward or not moving forward. It's really advisory.
So it's an FYI.
Yeah.
The for your information.
Right.
Kind of commentary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, if it's merely an advisory commentary statement, should it even be part of the process, or I mean, if it has no true function in either facilitating or hindering the application process, is it since it's merely an ancillary to the process, not even really an ancillary, it's just an aside, is it even useful to keep it in the NCD, or what is it, National NCD document?
Right. Well, we had review by the Plan Commission and also by the Historic Preservation Commission, and it was felt at those boards that it was helpful to have some sort of input from the Historic Preservation Commission. And frankly, the Historic Preservation Commission itself was kind of split in a way on whether or not they should formally be
advising
in the process itself, or whether they should be giving advice along the way. And how it ended up was that it seems like that among the Plan Commission, people speaking at the public hearings, and among the Historic Preservation Commission, it was felt like it was changed to the process that we have now, but at least they could offer advice that it would be useful for people. People, for instance, may not realize the significance of a particular area or a district that may be going through the Neighborhood Conservation District process, that it might possibly qualify as a local historic district, and if the applicant wanted to, they could they could reapply as a historic preservation district and have a higher level of protection.
Wouldn't it be wiser for the Historic Preservation Commission to merely educate neighborhoods about what they offer and not involve it in this process? I mean, couldn't their needs to educate the community be something that would be a mission for them and not necessarily involved in an ordinance that has nothing to do with there's been a lot of discussion about removing the whole NCD process from historic preservation, because we've already had a conversation about preservation districts and historic preservation districts, and the confusion in the public's mind about what might be expected then to be imposed upon them as property owners. So it seems to me that if a neighborhood is interested in historic preservation and to pursue it, it's something that they should be made aware of because it's available, but perhaps it would be actually more useful to remove that step from this document, because the intent of a person going for a neighborhood conservation district is very different than a neighborhood that's looking for historic preservation. So I'm just asking this question. I'm not sure what the appropriate answer is, but it seems like we've it seems like I don't know what like the third toe on a horse or something like that. It's kind of like it's a remnant from an antique or an ancient time in the conceptualization of the document, and I'm wondering if it's a useful part.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it's not a huge hindrance, but I'm just asking that. Maybe there can be discussion. Okay, that was my first question, as you recall.
Oh.
I did have another question that's perhaps
a different zoning. Okay.
And so my second one was when for some neighborhoods the current zoning and the retention of single-family homes is at odds, there is not a process in the NCD to actually initiate a zoning change request that I can tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happens is, as part of the process, once it's determined that the the area or neighborhood, the properties, the blocks, however you may define it, are eligible, then the real work starts, in that city staff works with the property owners and residents in that area to come up with a plan, essentially, on how to move forward and how to protect the character of that area that's been identified. And that plan could include different elements. It might include, for instance, possible rezoning in that area. It could include design guidelines. It could include possibly guidelines for the guidelines for the public right-of-way, in that people feel like that the character of this neighborhood is defined by its brick streets and its street lights and the arching tree canopy and the sidewalks and benches and et cetera, et cetera. And so maybe that sort of identification might come forward as part of a plan for future public improvements in that district. That as public improvements take place in this district, from here on out, we've decided that this is going to be kind of our agreed upon standard for that area. So it could take different forms, but certainly rezoning, recommendations on rezoning could be part of a plan, and even something that's integral to maintaining the character of that area.
Well, that's very heartening, because it didn't sound like it was very much, it wasn't included in the kinds of options that I felt were being, it wasn't included in the kind of options that I felt were being offered. And it was unclear, because the word zoning hadn't really, zoning is touched upon when you talk about establishing setbacks from property lines, because that is something that is regulated by zoning, and that's G1 on page 7 to 8. So perhaps it would be useful, I don't know, in making, it says Conservation District Design Guidelines, we have some design guidelines there. It might just be useful to insert the word reconsider current zoning as one of the features that can be discussed as an appropriate task of a conservation district.
Question.
Go ahead. Thank you, Dan.
When you spoke of how it breaks down when you establish the conservation district, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is once the conservation district is established, that's when the other components come into play with regard to how to identify that specific area. And that's where the staff gets involved with the zoning issues and all the other necessary ingredients that says this particular area needs addressing for housing, a very specific type of housing. If that district is established, and let's say they have, just to throw it out there, a Frank Lloyd Wright house type environment, that's when they would kick in the design criteria for that area. How do you want to maintain the integrity of that composition? Am I reading you right? Is that pretty much the way it kind of unfolds?
Yes.
Okay. And that would, though it's not all there, that's when, once it's defined, then you have all the other components that fall into place through staff that picks up the rest of the ingredients, because it could take a number of forms, like he said. It could be more major structures rather than housing, or it could go into a combination of both, and how you would address that in terms of design criteria when it addresses housing and major structures, and it goes back and forth. So I think you have to have some, it sounds a bit nebulous, but on the other hand, it is cohesive as you put the package together.
Can I respond?
Mr. Roberts.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. You're saying basically that we establish the ordinance, and then individual plans will engender from the city staff the steps it requires to fulfill them. I was just concerned that if it wasn't mentioned at all, that it might be interpreted later that it's not an appropriate discussion for a NCD. In other words, if we don't mention the possibility in the ordinance itself, would we perhaps come across a situation where a request might not be supported because it would not be in the overview of the guidelines? So I'm just wondering. In other words, by exclusion, do we lose the opportunity? I guess we can't imagine addressing every possible consideration of an NCD, but
Right. By not
consideration of
mentioning
zoning is a sort of a rather large part.
Right, but by not mentioning it, you're not prohibiting it, so I think anyone could still discuss it. Is that correct?
Is that legal's comment? Would that be appropriate? Legal hasn't been present here. All right. Okay.
Ms. Chenoweth.
I think I've had varying levels of comfort with this, and a little bit in response to Dennis. I think the most important piece that's going to come out of this is that it's a framework for design. It's not a design itself, and that in some ways we'll learn something from this process. So I think that it will empower neighborhoods to come up with designs, and I hope that that process is as participatory as possible, and that it isn't a situation that I am concerned about of a group of people kind of ganging up and another group of people want something different, and there's kind of vying for power. I'm concerned about that, but if it's done correctly, a neighborhood comes together and it works on a plan. And I think that plan actually could go outside of this. It could be that the neighborhood plan says, this area should be designated historic because it really fits the criteria for historic preservation. This area, really, we need to look at downzoning this area or upzoning this area or making this much more of a business corridor, et cetera. And here are some distinctive features like brick sidewalks or other things that really make our neighborhood special. And so I almost feel like the plan part that a neighborhood will create is a really empowering piece of the whole picture. And once a plan is made, I think the Neighborhood Conservation District might only fulfill a piece of that, and other pieces might need to come to the table in terms of zoning issues, which would be outside of the purview of this, historic preservation, et cetera. So once I kind of saw it that way and really emphasized the neighborhood plan piece, I became more comfortable with this, and I thought, even some of the comments that Mr. Fitch has brought forward, which I think are really astute, are kind of addressed in that this, the neighborhood plan is going to tell us kind of what to do next, and it might involve a bunch of different pieces to it.
Okay, let's move to the members of the audience who wanted to talk. Gary Shea.
It appears that you're poised to go ahead and implement a neighborhood conservation district. And as you've talked about it, I hear you talk about the getting the neighborhoods together, and there's an implication that it's going to be the will of the majority of a neighborhood. Unfortunately, that's not the way the ordinance is written. The way the ordinance is written, it says that a minimum of 25 lots would make up a neighborhood conservation district. And it only takes 15% of those property owners to start the petition. So that says if you have the smallest possible neighborhood conservation district, 4 property owners could start the process. And once the process goes through, it only requires 60% of those who vote to implement it, which says if the rest of the neighbors don't pay attention to what's going on, those same 4 people who started the petition could impose their will on the other 21 property owners. That doesn't seem right. So if you want to implement this, and you want to take into consideration the will of the neighborhoods, it would make much more sense to say, to start the neighborhood petition process, you need 50% of the property owners to start the petition. And for final approval, maybe it should be 60% of the property owners, not of those who vote, if you're really trying to implement the will of the people in those neighborhoods. So I ask you to please consider changing the percentages, one, to start the process, and two, who you're counting for the final vote should be all property owners, not just those who vote. Thank you.
Christopher Storr.
Thank you. I'm Chris Storr. I represent the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association. I am the president of the group. During the meetings that we've had where we've discussed the Neighborhood Conservation District Ordinance, the thing that has, topic that has most been brought up and discussed among the neighbors is the incorporation of architectural details for infill construction, especially for where single-family homes are converted to apartments. This has been a nagging concern that has plagued our the area of historic East Urbana, as some of these fine craft-built homes are worn down and then finally torn down and replaced with most utilitarian type design of an apartment, which lowers the property values and causes particular problems with parking throughout the neighborhood. Speaking of parking, that has been a topic that has that's been brought up by a few of the neighbors, but has not been a topic that has attracted near as much attention as the incorporation of the architectural details. The Neighborhood Conservation District Ordinance, as proposed, sets a very high standard to meet, and it has so much similarity with the Historic Preservation District that I can see where there would be confusion on the parts of a neighborhood in ascertaining that they're trying to establish a neighborhood conservation district rather than a historic preservation district, which have very different levels of restrictions. One, historic preservation district is very restrictive. The neighborhood conservation district is much less so. One of the things that has concerned me as I've listened to the discussion is discussing how a neighborhood conservation district might, comes to the city council where after a proposal is made and changes or adds to or rather than refines what has been proposed. This is this strikes me as a, could be sort of a bait and switch, and I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I think that what the neighbors propose in an original petition ought to be what is the subject of a neighborhood conservation district ordinance, and not to have any substantive change by adding or subtracting items. I think that this would help allay some of the fears that I've heard people complain about. I'm also kind of concerned on a personal note that the types of discussion that I hear at this late date as this ordinance comes close to a vote is that there's such concern described about some very basic elements of the ordinance. And I have proposed before that maybe further look by would should be taken before a vote of adoption be made. However, if the Neighborhood Conservation District ordinance is passed, HUNA will be willing to try this to accomplish the goals of our comprehensive plan. And if we find that it is not as helpful as we'd hope, we'd most certainly like to return to council with our experiences to see if this can be modified.
Any questions? Okay, Danielle Chenoweth.
I appreciate you coming out this evening because I consider HUNA to be the kind of test neighborhood on this, and certainly you all have been gearing up to participate in it. Other than I hear the issue of the high standards and that there are still concerns on the table. Do you have any particular proposals? I guess here's the thing, because I'm not privy, I'm not on your listserv, and I haven't seen the conversations. Is it that HUNA residents still need time to discuss this? Is it that HUNA residents have discussed it a lot and are very divided on, there's quite a bit of division there? Or is it that there's some proposals on the table that people are kind of chewing on? And so kind of what's the status of things in discussions in East Urbana?
Well, thanks for asking. I don't hear much dissent. In fact, across party lines, surprisingly, I've heard a great deal of favorable comment about the adoption of historic neighborhood conservation district. However, one of the concern of trying to meet a high standard of 60% seems challenging, and it will require a great deal of effort on the part of the proponents to do the door-to-door work that's going to take to get the favorable adoption by the respondents. Now, and again, the single topic that almost everybody brings up is the incorporation of architectural detail for infill development, and we're as a neighborhood very concerned about the tearing down of single-family homes in a single-family neighborhood, or at least we'd like to think it is, and building of utilitarian apartment houses, some of them with insufficient parking to accommodate the people living there. And this has been a common complaint, and it's a burden on the people that live there who want to maintain their properties and improve their properties in the hopes that that they can enjoy their improvements and have a reasonable expectation that the value of their house is not going to be diminished. But when a utilitarian type apartment house is built and you have parking in the front yard, apartments facing sideways, and with no windows or doors facing the street, this diminishes the neighborhood, and it discourages people from making the costly improvements that we'd like to have to maintain a nice neighborhood. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. I appreciate that. So it does sound like it's very favorable. And I will say in terms of us doing something, and there's some reservations about how it will play out. The one thing, just in response, I know we're not quite in discussion, but on the topic that you stated, this council needs to remember that next week, the week after, we could pass a resolution that says no parking in the front yard in a residential neighborhood. You must have windows facing the street, or you have to get a variance,
Indoors.
A special permit to do that. Some of these things that we're thinking neighborhood conservation is going to solve, this is not the way to solve this, because we don't want it just for one neighborhood, all neighborhoods. We don't want parking in the front of the street with a bunch of lots, and we don't want windowless facades, and unless there's some real significant reason why that is the architecture, and that could be described to a zoning board of appeals. So I just think some of these issues that keep coming up, we need to be looking at those from a much more holistic perspective than neighborhood conservation.
Any other comments? Thank you. Next, Diana Visick. Is that how you pronounce your name? Would you state your... Visick. Sorry to mispronounce it. Would you say your name and address?
It's a trick name.
Okay.
I'm Diana Visick. I live at 608 West Pennsylvania Avenue, deep in the heart of Woona. And I was disappointed to hear that the council was still considering instituting neighborhood conservation districts. The Plan Commission has already spent a great deal of time considering this issue and has unanimously determined that there are better ways to address Urbana's problems. My sister is a licensed landscape architect in upstate New York who regularly writes these kinds of ordinances for small municipalities. She echoes what our Plan Commission has said, that the best way to proceed is to identify specific problems the community is worried about and see how they might be addressed by normal zoning and other ordinances. Only after this process has been completed should overlay zoning be considered. And that's what NCDs are, is overlay zoning. For example, Charlie Smythe has said that he's worried about that a developer could buy 3 lots, tear down the houses, and build a snort house, which I believe he defines as a large house with a 3-car garage right next to the sidewalk. Our existing setback and footprint requirements would probably prevent this travesty. And as the previous speaker talked about, the problems with parking, with having apartment buildings in a single-family neighborhood, all of these sorts of issues that he talked about could be dealt with through normal zoning. We don't need NCDs to deal with the problems of HUNA. I sympathize with the problems of HUNA, but that can be dealt with through other means, not through NCDs. While the city has mentioned problems they would like to prevent, the discussion has been in very general terms. Quote, incompatible infill development, unquote, is a very broad term used to justify the necessity for design review. But design review is highly subjective, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Part of the charm of the Woona neighborhood is the diversity. My sister also says that having the community buy into the process is imperative. The regulations need to be spelled out clearly in advance of any vote, and at least 80% of the residents need to approve them. And the same percentage should be required for any changes in the regulations. Anything less than 80% creates dissension that can rip a community apart. The ordinance you have before you is a recipe for dissension. The first problem is that only 15% of property owners or a neighborhood association is required to start the process. The people voting at a neighborhood association meeting are only a small fraction of a neighborhood, probably much less than 15%, and 15% is too low. The second problem is that only 60% of property owners need to approve the idea for it to be imposed on the other 40%. There should be at least 80% approval. The third problem is that 25% of parcel owners are required for a protest against designation. And even then, the protest can be overruled by a 2/3 vote of the City Council. This percentage is too high, and the City Council should not be allowed to overturn a protest. And the fourth problem is that the design guidelines can be amended later by the City Council. This right should be reserved exclusively to the owners of parcels within the NCD. The ordinance states that design guidelines will cover such issues as porches, exterior materials, roof line and pitch, facade and elevation features, and screening and landscaping. These are highly subjective aspects of design, which most homeowners would object to giving over to bureaucratic control. A neighborhood is more than structures. In your desire to preserve appearance, you risk destroying relationships. In your desire to prevent ugliness, you're willing to create disharmony. I think very few residents of Urbana have any idea what you're proposing. Once they're forced into this process, or hear about other citizens forced into this process, public reaction could be strong. In fact, it could turn into the equivalent of Champaign's reaction to their smoking ban. The City Council thought it was a good idea, only to discover at the next election that the citizens didn't agree with them. Rather than finding out the hard way that this ordinance isn't in keeping with the desires of the people, I urge you to step back and rethink it. Make a list of specific scenarios you wish to avoid and see how existing regulations might prevent them. If you insist on neighborhood conservation districts, then rewrite the percentages and procedures to reduce dissension. At least 80% of parcel owners should be required to approve an NCD. Only 15% should be required for a binding protest. And any changes to the NCD or design guidelines should be approved by the same percentages. Don't destroy the soul of Urbana to preserve its appearance. Thanks.
Any questions?
No other questions.
Okay, thank you. Tyler Fitch.
Hello, I'm Tyler Fitch, 503 East California. Thanks for all the consideration you've given this issue. I think that this council takes a very thoughtful approach to public problems, and I really appreciate that. Thanks for the great input that people have given. And as you can tell, there are differences of opinion, and that's the way the debate went on the Plan Commission. There's a lot of difficulty understanding these, exactly how would they benefit the public, and what problems would NCDs address, and what do you do about opposition versus inclusion versus initiation, the percentages, how do you create buy-in while still having a process that is achievable. The closest corollary we have, I think, is historic preservation process, which is a difficult process to achieve. I think there's been one serious attempt here that did not succeed. The percentages here, talked about them a lot. It's still more difficult to achieve an NCD than it is to achieve historic preservation. 15% to initiate an NCD, 25% to initiate historic preservation. You got the 60% registered preference process in the middle of NCD. It's not part of historic preservation. And then at the end to register a protest, 25% in the NCD ordinance to register a protest and kick in the 2/3 majority versus 40% in the historic preservation ordinance. So whether, the historic preservation and NCD, this is harder to achieve. And supposedly less restrictive of property rights. And that gets to an email that I had sent to Dennis today about exactly what is the difference between historic preservation, which a lot of people fear, and they feel threatened by it. I've heard people argue that that's because it's an education issue, and I think that may be true, but I also think it's because people don't like to be regulated. Unless there's a real good public purpose and they understand what it is. So with that in mind, the thing that I still don't get out of this ordinance is exactly how is this less onerous, less restrictive of property rights than historic preservation. If it is, in fact, less restrictive of property rights, why is it harder to achieve? So those are the two, and then I had suggested some things that might be included to make it clear what the ways in which a conservation district differs from an historic preservation district. And these include exemptions, variances, and incentives. So exemptions, these are an ideated list. Energy-saving devices, solar panels, possible exemption. Materials of durable quality, so long as they are don't detract significantly from the area, from the rest of the area. Unique and innovative structures of significant architectural and artistic value. Windows, doors, and openings in single-family residences. Those are examples. Handicap accessibility structures might be considered. Then variances. Individual property owners can have relief if they can demonstrate that there is a good reason why they should have a variance. And then I named out some things to be given special consideration, such as renovations to owner-occupied property where the owner has income less than or equal to 150% of the poverty level. In other words, don't make it too hard for people to keep their homes in good living condition or expand their homes if they don't have the means to do so. Section 8 housing is one to consider. Quality affordable housing is an important goal in the community and needs to be considered in this context, I think. CDBG funded improvements. I'm not sure how that plays. There's federal regulations there. If there's a conflict, is there a conflict? I don't know. But it's something to think about. Proprietors of neighborhood businesses, if you want to promote neighborhood businesses. Things of that nature. And then structures that burn down or have other serious damage. Could there be reasons to implement variances for rebuilding and repair? So I think that the ordinance still causes confusion and still needs a little bit of work. And that's one of the areas I would head down. I do think that, not to disagree with my good friend and neighbor, Mr. Storr, but when you talk about is there buy-in in HUNA, we haven't heard anybody, we've heard a lot of support for this concept. But we've heard it in the context of regulate the multifamily structures that are being placed on formerly single-family lots. And that's one context, and there's a whole set of criteria that goes into that consideration. We haven't heard much about what happens when they start to regulate the color I can paint my home, or et cetera, et cetera. To the extent that we have heard anything about that, it hasn't been tremendously positive. So if you're going to create this thing, you're going to encounter many of the kind of things you do with historic preservation, and so you need to draw a real distinction, I think. Anything?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Roger Woodbury.
Hello, all. I've been involved with this thing for over 3 years, so there's been 3 years of notices, public notices on this whole concept of neighborhood conservations. And I've been positive, negative. I just quickly read the latest thing because I've been away from it for 6 months. Basically, it's 28 adjoining plots. Is that the minimum?
25.
25. Mm-hmm. And you need 15% of those 25 adjoining to petition, and then you need 60% of the 25 to approve the whole thing. So it's 60% of the landowners.
60% of the voters, not the 25.
Yeah, plus a council vote on top of that, which hasn't been discussed.
60% of the voters. Yeah, okay. Well, that might be a little, yeah, that's kind of a change from last time. But I agree with Dennis Roberts that you should get the historical preservation people out of this whole thing, because you walk around with a petition. I live on Iowa Street. You mention to people they're fine with neighborhood conservation district, but once you mention design controls, which is the historical preservation whole thing, they go totally off it. So I think that's a very good point. Other than that, I don't think it should override zoning. I think the zoning's already there. And anybody that thinks they're going to get any neighborhood that has apartment owners to approve this thing are dreaming. You're not going to get 60% of property owners or 60% of people, they're all going to vote. So it's only going to preserve the single-family home neighborhood. It's not going to roll back or do any of the, where the apartments are already there. So I would say tweak it a little bit, but I think it's a good, and make any design standards minimal.
Okay, any council members want to say anything else? Lynn Barnes.
I think the input tonight's been very helpful and added to our thinking on this subject. I think that this isn't quite soup yet. While I have an interest in some degree of conservation, and I have an interest in what Danielle pointed out, is that I think we need to tackle the bigger problems. And this is kind of like, I don't know, it's like like a piece of tape, kind of. I mean, I don't think it's an overriding fix on some of our more concerning issues. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, but I am concerned particularly about the 60% approval by voting members. Someone mentioned that would be hard to get, depending on how it's handled and, in terms of people being informed. I think that might be simple to get, because you can see a neighborhood not being totally informed, and the people that are really, really informed will be the ones that will be active and the ones that would be voting, and others who wouldn't be informed wouldn't be stepping up and saying yes or no. So I have some concern about that.
Robert Lewis.
Well, the comments from the general public tonight has been very good as we try to go down this road, but I agree that we need to sit down with staff and have a clear, concise understanding of what we might do to resolve some of these little issues, because there's a litany of them there. Some of them, my first reaction was, I agree that this zoning and those elements are already in place to deal with the overall picture, and it is over zoning, if you want to think of it that way. I agree with that. So I think in light of the conversation tonight, I think we should try to take a hard look at some of these elements and see if we can refine them to the satisfaction of the community.
Danielle Chenoweth.
I think my litmus test for most policies is, can I explain it, or can anyone explain it? And can we explain it in like 2 sentences? And if we can't, then I'm concerned about the issue of what happens when some people understand it and some people don't, or there's misunderstandings. This is going to be historic preservation. This is going to prevent demolition. And then the house goes down and then everyone's upset because they don't understand why the house went down, because we have a neighborhood conservation district and it shouldn't do this. So there's so much in the spirit of this I support, especially the concept of a neighborhood plan, and I think that maybe we should go forward with that. In fact, I don't even know if we necessarily need a vote. We could ask staff their opinion, but HUNA needs to, I know that HUNA's working on a plan. Let's start doing the process of the planning process, and similarly with WUNA and other neighborhoods, I think we need to move forward with the planning piece. I think we need to deal with the zoning issues, the parking issues, the window issues, and let's do that for the whole city. Is there anyone here who wants houses without windows that face the street? Is there anyone who's, okay, so Robert is the only person, you're a minority. So let's move forward with prohibiting houses with, and Robert can get a special use permit and try to make the argument to us that, that there shouldn't be windows facing the street. I am concerned about dissension in the neighborhood. That's a piece that I'm in particular concerned about because I've seen it and I see what happens when folks feel like they're run over. So that's a concern. I think that some things have been built in to help with that. And I said this the first time it came to us, June 18th, I really think we should limit the level of design standards that we were talking about. Certain things should be permissible, but other things I think could just, it could just get out of control and we'd be back in Florida. An appeals process I think is a really important thing. What happens if, is there an appeals process if there's economic hardship, et cetera? In the historic preservation ordinance, we do have an appeals process. It is the case that if there's certain hardship, et cetera, there's a certificate of appropriateness, et cetera, and I don't necessarily see that in here. I also would like to see that ballots be sent by certified mail. I think it's really important that we be able to verify that people got the mail. So let's, I don't think HUNA or WUNA should have to wait 3 years to start be working on a neighborhood plan and to develop really specific requests of things that might run the gamut from zoning all the way to design standards. Let's do that. And let's start addressing the specific requests of neighborhoods. But I have been on the fence about this from the beginning, and this evening's discussion makes me think we're not ready to move forward with this.
Ms. Stevenson.
Well, I would agree with you, Danielle. I don't think this is ready for a vote, and I think that the low percentages are just add more dissension, required voting, and my biggest concern is I hear design guidelines, and Joseph Royer was a great architect, and he didn't have design guidelines. He got to be creative and do his own things, and I think that when you have a neighborhood conservation district, when it comes to architects that are in the school at the U of I, this inhibits their creativity. And I have a problem with that because while I think that Joseph Royer's work is great, I think that there's some great architects out there that need to have the same ability to be as creative as he was.
Dennis Roberts.
And I really wish that the developers would hire those tremendous architects for their plans, because so far I haven't seen any of those appearing in our neighborhood. Maybe they're just working on larger municipal buildings and they're not doing 5-plex apartment houses. I want to just address a few things. The whole I think it was very interesting, Tyler's comments and I passed out his email to me to all the members of the City Council, and he does talk about certain things which would, if added or mentioned in the ordinance, the areas of exemptions, variances, how they might be addressed, and a variety of compliance issues and incentives, it might provide a wider understanding of specific issues that might be handled through that are of concern of the people who are perhaps going to be discussing in their neighborhood at one of such ordinances. Now, the ordinance doesn't establish any particular plan. It just sets up a format so that any group of concerned citizens or a neighborhood association could begin to build a plan and bring it to the City Council. The fact that it only takes 15% of a neighborhood to come up with a plan is totally appropriate. Actually, 1 or 2 inspired individuals could come up with a plan that would suit the entire city. It doesn't mean that because they come up with a plan, it's automatically installed. Merely, it's a way of establishing a dialogue in a community. 3 people can begin a dialogue, or 25 people, or 200 people. It still doesn't change the quality of the dialogue that's established. So that's a figure that I have no problem with. I think that it's possible that the NCD will provide an adequate tool. We really don't know until somebody comes forward with a proposal. I do take an interest in Danielle's comments that if the city is interested in having, considered design review in a large basis, well, we can have that discussion. But I'm not sure that there will be a lot of people who live in certain parts of Urbana that are basically new construction or fairly new neighborhoods will have any interest in such kind of such a program. I think some of these issues really apply to your older neighborhoods where the conditions have brought forth these questions over and over again. While we've heard some interesting complaints or concerns about the use of the NCD, since there is not a specific plan before us, it's hard to evaluate the effect it would have on our neighborhood. And what I have noticed in this town is that when a public discussion occurs in an area for planning concerns, and I'm going to suggest the Boneyard project, the Crystal Lake neighborhood plan that's under consideration right now, our staff has the ability and the wisdom to know how to make a very open discussion, have really useful public meetings in which all of the members are informed to come, allow complete access to public input during those meetings, and have subsequent evaluations and come back again for a second evaluation process. So in a way, I think that the city staff here is totally prepared to handle the kind of discussion that might come up in a neighborhood area over the installation and the establishment of an NCD. I have no doubt that we have the ability to hold those kinds of open discussions. And then in that discussion, we can find out if that neighborhood section is ready for the process or not. They may be dying to try to get something established in their area, or they may be ambivalent. And if they're ambivalent, the 60% of votes at the end will not come forward, and that will pretty much settle the question. Maybe the neighborhood will then have to decide, well, what do we, is there another way of handling the situation? Well, we're pretty smart and we're pretty creative people, and we can figure that out. So the process doesn't scare me. And I don't think it should really scare anybody, because the results are still totally open to public discussion at every step of the way. We may not be able to finalize the NCD ordinance tonight. We may want to have some more input or refine it somewhat, but I don't think it's time to throw it away. So I would suggest that staff incorporate some of the discussion items that have come up. Maybe City Council would like to enumerate some that they'd like to see included in the ordinance for clarification for the future in the next week or at this time right now. And let's wait and see what happens in the future. You may have wanted to see this being passed tonight. I think that we're not quite ready from the discussion we've had. But on the other hand, is this a terrible experience? And is this ordinance a doomsday machine? I don't think so, unless we make it so.
We do have a motion on the floor, so.
Yeah, we do, actually.
So how would you like to deal with that? Lynn Barnes.
I'd like to move that we postpone this until council meeting in November, giving time for staff and other interested parties to continue to work on this motion and ordinance. Specifically around a couple issues that I'm interested in is the design limits, as you mentioned, Danielle, and then I am still concerned about percentages, and if we're going to use these, I'd like to see evidence that these have been successfully used in other communities.
Okay. I'll ask the clerk, is there provision for us to postpone something for a definite date in November?
Yes.
Okay. There is. Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Mr. Lewis. Is that right?
That's correct.
All those in favor, please signify. Oh, Mr. Bowersox would like to comment. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, well, my comments are really sort of about the bigger motion as well, but I'm ready to support the Neighborhood Conservation District ordinance tonight and vote yes on it, and I would encourage other people to as well, I think, as I've said all along, it's an invitation to neighborhoods to come to us with a proposal. It's not enacting any restrictions on anyone at this point. And when the first proposal comes to us, we'll really learn a lot about the kinds of things we have to work through. It'll go to the Plan Commission, it'll go to Historic Preservation, it'll come here again for a final vote, and all the neighbors will be involved in meetings and in getting registered preference forms sent to them and voting. So we'll all be part of the discussion before any limitations, rules, process, design guidelines would be passed that would require anybody to do anything in particular. A few comments about people's specific questions and issues. Dennis, you'd mentioned the question of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I really think it's okay to have the paragraph in there that the Historic Preservation Commission weighs in. I think that it lets them be part of the loop and part of the communications, and putting my Preservation Commission member hat on and thinking about how they would think of it, you know, I can imagine them being worried if they weren't part of the loop and any part of the process, and some people, you know, come in and say, well, we want a neighborhood conservation district for West Main Street or for some district that really has the historic level of significance to be a district in its own right, and they would think, well, wow, this whole process could sail through and we'd never have the chance to even tell the neighbors about that. So I think that that paragraph and that inclusion in the process is really good. About the 60% and the issue of the, you know, the minority and the majority, we've adjusted the numbers a few times and changed the rule to have it be just the 60% of those responding, not the 60% of everyone in the district. And I think I support the numbers the way they are because we enact design guidelines and have already with 0% of the people in the district registering their preference any one way or not. We've decided that a specific neighborhood should have design guidelines because it's the right thing for the neighborhood, and it's the right thing in this case for the MOR district. And we decided that because we thought that, that was the right thing for those neighbors and they didn't have to vote one way or another on it. So, and we'll also get a final vote when any neighborhood conservation district comes. We're the final say on approving it. We have the right to approve it up or down and also to amend it. So we're really the final arbiters of whether or not there's dissension and we're forcing something upon neighbors, or whether or not there's grassroots and broad support for some measure. And that's already the case in all the zoning we do and in all the design guidelines that we already have and use. We had to ask ourselves, gee, is this really going to create dissension in the MOR district, or is this really something that most people want? With regard to the issue of it being all property owners versus the responding property owners, we're already hearing from people in neighborhood groups that it's hard to get people to respond to things and that it's really hard enough to get 60% of the people responding to say yes, and it should be a high hurdle so that we know there's broad agreement about something. But I think to make it 60% or 80% of all property owners would be really impossible, and there'd never be a district because of just the number of people that don't respond and don't vote. I mean, Americans are only 30% of Americans are registered to vote in an election, right? And that's when they get to choose their mayor or their president. And only 30% of them even sign up to be able to go to the polls. And even fewer than that actually go to the polls and vote. So I think it's hard to imagine a future where 60 or 80% of all the people in the district are going to take the time to get involved in their local government. I think that's just asking an impossible challenge. So I think it has to be based on the percentage of the property owners that actually send something back. The one last thing I wanted to mention is just that this really is an invitation for a bottom-up process and not a top-down process. And it should in no way stop us from doing those things that we already know are right and that we already want to do to make zoning, to make rules about windows and sideways apartment buildings and about buildings up on stilts. It should in no way stop us from addressing those things, and we already are. Those are already in our plan. They're already in our staff's work plan. Our staff are working on these issues and bringing us proposals for changing zoning, for doing design guidelines in other areas and all of that, and we should continue to do that. This is just a different angle and a different tool in the tool belt to invite neighbors to, from the bottom up, bring their proposals to us. So those are my thoughts. I hope people support the concept, and I hope that responds to some people's concerns.
Mr. Myers.
I had a question for clarification on the motion. When you mentioned, Lynn, when you mentioned design limits what specifically are you thinking about?
Well, I think it needs to be more clear in the ordinance itself what kinds of things that an organization, that a group of people could bring forward, to council in terms of controlling how their neighborhood looks. So,
Okay.
How far-reaching is it? How limiting is it? I mean, can they determine of the paint color, or is it just more about architectural details with regard to new buildings? I think there's a lot of good things that could be included, and some things that might be overreaching.
Okay. It was in, just for clarification, we intended it to be such that we definitely try not to take a one-size-fits-all approach, because we've had such differing ideas from different areas about what their needs are. So we want to make sure that whatever would be adopted for that particular area is customized for that area. And certain area may feel like one thing is very important, then another area may feel like that's totally the wrong track, and that's not important to us, and we need to be doing this. So we've tried very hard to keep that in mind.
Dennis Roberts.
And specifically, that question is somewhat answered on page 8, because there is a section 3, G3, and it talks about proposed design guidelines prescribing future development in the district and may include the following or other elements, and it lists 7 or 8 elements, and they're all very general, nothing specific. It never mentions paint color. If you, in the historic preservation ordinance, it doesn't tell you what color to paint your house, and it doesn't prescribe paint color in this ordinance either. Now, a neighborhood association or a neighborhood group might talk about it in their suggestions, but I don't think it's going to hold water because it's too specific. That's a red herring fear factor question that comes up. It has nothing to do with this ordinance or the kinds of discussions that would happen about building size and massing, roof line or pitch, facade elevation features, orientations of windows and doors and porches, exterior materials, parking areas, and screening and landscaping. And it doesn't say anything specific about what those might be. It just talks about those as things that might be considered, and it doesn't say how they would be considered, but these are just general list of things that might be considered in discussing what you feel, or to create a program. So.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor, which is to postpone this until November. Did you have a specific date in mind?
First council meeting.
First council meeting in November?
Council,
committee meeting? First committee meeting?
Either one. We're at council this time. We're at council now, so.
All right. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carried. All right, moving on. Reports of standing committees, the Committee of the Whole. Who was the chair the last meeting?
I have a report.
That would be Lynn.
First item is ordinance number 2007-09-109, an ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets. Smith Road between Michigan Avenue and Rainbow View, Myra Ridge Drive, north of Windsor Road. And on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I so move.
Motion by Barnes, seconded by Stevenson. Any discussion? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Shanawith?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes. Ordinance number 2007-09-110, an ordinance deleting Section 2338 of the Urbana Traffic Code entitled Neighborhood Electric Vehicles and establishing a new Section 2338 entitled Neighborhood Vehicles. And on behalf of the committee, I so move.
I second that motion.
Motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Mr. Roberts. Any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Shanawith?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
That motion carries. Ms. Barnes.
Ordinance number 2007-09019R, a resolution approving the purchase of certain real estate with a contribution of tax increment financing funds, 911 North Lincoln Avenue. For the committee, I so move.
I second it.
Motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Mr. Roberts. Any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
That motion carries. Okay, I don't believe we have any reports of special committees. Reports of officers. Tom Carino has an economic development report.
Evening. I'll just very quickly highlight some of the major projects that are going on. Staff is working with consultants on several projects, including Rich and Associates on a downtown parking study. We're working with Wank Associates on the Boneyard beautification plan, and we've selected a firm with which to negotiate scope of services on the North Cunningham beautification, as well as the Philo Road beautification project. So those are all moving forward. The La Gourmandise Bistro on Main is now open on Main Street at 119 West Main, so that's a great addition to downtown. And then, as I've mentioned, over the last couple months, the incredible construction activity we've seen along Philo Road and Windsor Road, including Carl Clinic, Christie Clinic, Monocle's, Busey Bank, the Pines at Stone Creek Commons, Meyer, Walgreens, the Point at U of I, just a lot of things happening all over the city, particularly in southeast Urbana, so lots of great things happening.
Yay, Urbana.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. All right, now on to new business. We have resolution number 2007-10-020R. This is a resolution forming the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission of Champaign County. That's in conjunction with the County of Champaign and the City of Champaign.
Mayor,
So it's the City of Urbana.
I'll have to recuse myself from discussion on this.
No, this is the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Chenoweth, seconded by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, then on to the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission of Champaign County. I'm suggesting Barbara Wysocki, the ever-present Laurel Pressing, Todd Rent, Dennis Roberts, and Anki Voss.
Second.
Okay, motion to approve by Mr. Bowersox, seconded by Ms. Barnes. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.